And here we go, starting off on Venus, on the Stationeers difficulty, on the brutal starting conditions. Yes, Stationeers means everything is harder, everything decreases faster. That includes hunger, mood, thirst, hygiene, everything, even battery power. So this is going to be a lot of fun. And with the brutal starting conditions, we get the minimal supply box here. And as the name suggests, it's minimal, as in, I think this is literally the least amount of resources they could have given you to even stand a chance at building a base on this planet. Which is saying something because, as I believe, I think the starting minimal supplies are the same across all planets, but I'm not sure. I'm going to have to check that later. But you're given the minimum amount of food, water, and as you can see, the base materials to build the foundation and construct your base, along with the auto lathe and other resources. And you can see that I'm doing that right now. It's one of the first things you're going to want to do, just to throw your supplies on there. Now, something I really want to emphasize for anyone that wants to try playing with these difficulty modifiers on this planet is that you really are on a pretty strict time limit that isn't clearly visible, but it's definitely there. I guess one way of seeing that time limit, though, would be to check that oxygen tank that's right there in the middle left of my screen where the Ava suit's at. As you can see in the outside air of this planet, that thing is decreasing so quickly, along with the waste tank increasing, which is pretty bad for two reasons. Not just because we're losing oxygen, but because, in fact, that waste tank air can be recycled. The fact is we don't have a rebreather set up. I don't think anyone could get it set up fast enough to save the first of the waste tank fully filling up, so you're going to end up wasting quite a bit of it at first. So we're going to want to start with building that as soon as possible after we get the base up, of course. And here we're going to be starting off with the first fabricator and smelter for any starting base, and that's going to be the arc furnace and the auto lathe. I think it's important to note that the arc furnace has different smelting times for different materials, like iron, copper, gold. This is according to the Stationeers wiki that's, although it's only current up till 2021 according to the update note on it, I still think that it's completely accurate just looking at the times myself playing in-game, but according to that, it's going to be like 1 second for every ingot you produce with something like iron, whereas with gold, which is the longest amount of time and energy use, will be up to 6 seconds. I just think it's important to bring up because if those are like the primary ores you're going to be trying to use early game between iron, silicon, gold, and copper. You're going to need more as time goes on, but I think those will be the primary ones, not including, obviously, like coal, which are mostly going to be used for the solid generator if you get that up instead of solar. You can even see here that I'm preemptively putting down the cabling for the solid generator just because of how important it is to my bases usually when I start them off. I am going to place down the starting solar panel, but that's only just to get it out of the way. I'll even fully construct it with the glass, but I'm not going to cable it up to anything. I usually do this because, at least on Venus, I find it kind of pointless to go with solar this early in game just because of the minuscule amount of power that it produces. I mean, even if you set up logic or use IC programming to actually have it point towards the sun all the time, that does increase the energy output of it by a lot, but it still doesn't add up to the solid generator, in the early game at least. I mean, eventually you'll get to a point where you'll have so many things demanding power that you really are going to want to mostly automate it instead of constantly feeding that thing. But for the most part in the early game, you're going to want to rely on it almost entirely. This also means that we're going to be producing a lot of heat when this thing is active. It's not really apparent yet since the walls and roofing haven't really been finished. It's not a solid structure yet. But when the entire thing is sealed, it is going to produce quite a lot of carbon dioxide and heat. We're going to want that vent up at the same time also. I mean, that's partially why I want it there. There is another reason, because we're going to be vacuuming out our base as well. But the other reason, too, why I like to have it in the same room is it allows you to seal the door and not have the entirety of your room get polluted by that thing. But other than constantly having to manage mining and then the air pollution, it's a worthwhile upgrade. I found that using solar panels, you just don't get a major amount of power from it until you set up a large amount of arrays with it using heavy panels. That's another problem too, is that on this planet, when storms happen, the basic ones get damaged. They can get damaged so much that it only takes 2 storms to fully knock them out, so we're going to want to definitely rely on that. So there's going to be moments like here with the mining and also with long construction that I think is a bit monotonous, where I'm going to be fast forwarding through things. I'm just doing that because even though I find a lot of the mining and building to be kind of zenful, if anything, I do admit that it goes on for like way too long sometimes. I mean, it's just the sheer amount of resources and materials you need to get things going. You know, it's going to lead to really long mining times. And something else too is you notice that I'm just mining the top surface layer of ores. That's also an intentional technique I have for this planet specifically. That's because the pressure on here is so high that creating large voids in the ground can actually cause the air to rush in. You can actually see the particle effects kind of right there. It's so intense, it can actually knock around your character to the point where if he hits the ground, it can tear the suit open. You need to be very careful about that, especially since the air here is poisonous. So breathing it in even for a few seconds will cause you to go into lung damage that's so intense you'll start dying. And we only have 1 pill, so only 1 chance to recover from that, and I really don't want to waste it on something like a mining accident happening, so I just really want to adhere to that, even if it is a bit resource wasteful. And there we're done with our first of many rounds of mining out there. We even got a little bit lucky by just finishing right when it became nighttime, although all the future mining excavations we go out into aren't going to be so lucky. We are going to have to start getting used to mining at night, which isn't really that bad. I have a way of dealing with it, but I think I just got barely enough to start on the electronics printer. We're going to want to start on that before we get the solid generator, because the solid generator itself needs to be printed from the electronics printer. We're going to need it anyway if we want to produce more cabling, so it's going to have to be the first thing we do. Both the generator and the printer are going to require large amounts of copper and iron. Also, a little bit of silicon is going to be needed, and gold for the actual printer itself, but other than that, mostly iron and copper. The same thing's going to go for the pipe bender after that, but as you can see for this stage though, the printing times for both of them, as well as the ore smelting, is going to take such a long amount of time. I think I actually get to it right about now, that you're watching the battery for your base drain in real time, and watching this thing go all the way from green to red to even flashing red if you're not on it enough or you're multitasking things like I'm doing can be, well, it makes you feel a little bit impatient about waiting for this stuff, but that's just what you have to do for large amounts of time in the beginning. Crafting times are pretty high, but once we get the thing going, we're going to be starting on much larger construction projects, especially for the mid-game. Honestly, one of the major things we want to do, though, in terms of saving air, is going to be building the walls and the ceiling. We really want to fully seal the base from the outside, but for now, we're just going to have to make do with making unlimited electricity, basically. And here I'm just going to let it play out exactly how long this is going to take. Watch. And yeah, that's how long it actually took to fabricate that. Even with fast forwarding and also the fact that I talked a little bit while it was constructing, it still took that long for it to finish. And we're not even done yet. We still have to do the solid generator, which takes almost just as long. I understand that they're very important structures to go with, and honestly, it's not even really all that bad waiting for them in any other part of the game, but for the early game, it's just, I don't know, for some reason it's like the main thing I remember about starting off is just waiting and watching your station battery decrease. I mean, I know most people, pretty much everyone who plays this game knows, but if that battery goes to 0 on this difficulty, on this planet especially, you're basically dead. I mean, that's it. You pretty much are going to need to start over or pick like an autosave that's good enough. So now that we got the electronic printer fully constructed and cabled up, we're going to want to transfer resources into it and start with the solid generator. I'm going to bring it up right now. It's just down there, and it's going to have a long crafting time. We're probably going to need to go out and start mining again if we want to get the rest of the materials. It's not going to be as bad, and once we get it up, everything, well, almost everything from here on out is going to be much easier with the electricity demand being met. Then with the solid fuel generator, it also produces up to 20 kilowatts of energy per game tick. That's important because that's so high that can technically burn out the basic cable. The only reason that's not an issue at this point is it's based on energy demand. So the demand is so low that the energy being produced isn't enough to burn it out. But we're definitely going to want to switch to the heavy cables eventually for that. Another thing to mention as far as charging the base, since we're using the area controller and the small battery charger, that means that since we're just using the small and the large cells, it's only going to take like a little bit of time to fully charge those, but specifically the charger and the area controller only have like a 400 watt per game tick charging time, which is so low compared to the output of the solid generator itself. The reason why that matters is because most of the energy being created from the generator is pretty much being wasted, because even though the power being outputted from it is based on the demand, the coal is still being burned at the same amount of time regardless of how much power you're drawing from it, which means that the majority of the power from the coal is being wasted. This can be alleviated by creating a higher draw or hooking it up directly to a station battery instead, but for now we don't have any of that, so most of the power is being wasted. What that means is we're going to want to start cutting our coal into smaller portions to feed into the generator so we're not wasting as much. As another way it can be wasted is by putting too much coal in it, which can cause it to create energy when there's no demand for it. We also really don't want to do that. Even though coal is technically limitless, you have to go further and further the more you keep mining it, so we definitely want to conserve it at least a bit. And there I almost went out mining without my trusty flares, which definitely would have been a mistake. Nighttime mining is definitely required, especially if you're playing on a planet like this. You want to mine as much as possible. You need a nearly constant influx of resources. But the reason why you want something like the flares for the very beginning, since they give them to you in that starter chest, is because it is very, very easy to get lost. Yeah, I know there are technically ways to alleviate that other than using flares. You could use the compass that's at the bottom right there next to your portrait. You could also technically use like the starter pod because it emits like a light, but doing that you have to stay at a specific direction. I find the best way is to just light a flare on your base, that way you can see it from every direction. But any other method that works for you is fine. But you definitely don't want to get lost because you'll die very quickly. Alright, since the solid generator and electronic printer are up, my next new goal is going to be the pipe bender fabricator. We're going to need that if we want to produce the pipe and passive vent for the end there for my little 1x1 room there. That's going to be important because, as I said before, the air here is poison. Because of that, we can't open our helmet at all unless we want to start taking lung damage. So that means eating and drinking is off limits. So the only way for us to eat and drink on this planet is to create a vacuumed out room that doesn't have any air in it so that we can do that. That's what that little room is going to be, but we need a pipe and a passive vent. I know it's technically possible to use the auto lathe to produce pipes, and you could just produce enough pipes to draw in the air, but on this planet that's very difficult because the pressure is so high. You would need a very large quantity of pipes on the other end to make that work. And I would just rather do it this way. If you move fast enough, you can make it in time before your health drops low enough, so I don't really want to do it the other way. I also want to mention that it's a good way to save air and to save the amount of food and hunger that you use, to just wait until your health drops to the absolute minimum that it can go to, or, that you feel safe with. I'd say like 10 to 15% is pretty good. And then to eat and drink, because the game doesn't actually penalize you in any way I can think of for doing that. You don't lose hunger and thirst faster if your health is regenerating up, or it doesn't go up at all. Nothing like that happens, so you can just wait until it decreases to the lowest amount and then eat and drink. I guess a small penalty that you do get for that is that your mood decreases faster, but honestly mood isn't something you're going to care about much in the early game as much as just trying to survive at this point. Especially since food and water are going to run out faster. Well, not faster, but they'll be more of a problem to replenish than oxygen down the line. And that's actually another reason why we want to build this pipe bender, is we want to get that rebreather up so that we can maximize the usage of our oxygen, because for the short term, at least in the early game here, oxygen is going to be a major problem. And now with the pipe bender up, we can finish the little 1x1 room I have there. I just need to make a single pipe and the passive vent, and then construct a door from the auto lathe there to fully seal it. Once that's done, I'll finally be able to get rid of that red thirst bar you can see there at the top right. Hunger and thirst, as I said before, are going to be very difficult to replenish, because the only way we're going to be able to get more water and food on this planet is to finish building the hangar, the trader. We're going to need to start trading, and trading for the largest part is RNG based. It's really random what kind of trades you're going to get, so we may even need to go further than that and build the sleeper pod so we can preserve ourselves before we get the correct trader. But for now, we just want to finish this part, and then directly after that, we're going to want to start on fully constructing the walls and the roof of the base to seal ourselves in. And also, yeah, as you just saw, I'm going to be printing out blank canisters to use to save my waste. It actually does pay off, because I'm not sure what the exact number is, but I think about 60 or 70% of waste tank air is just oxygen that's been recycled or hasn't been efficiently recycled, and it just ends up in your waste tank again. You can't directly refill your oxygen tank with it because the temperature has gone up significantly, so much so that if you were to try to put it back in your air tank, even if you filter out the carbon dioxide, you'd get like a heat warning and you would start to die from it, so you can't just do that. You have to build a dedicated rebreather, which we're going to do after this. Honestly, this part's going to go on for quite a while because of the amount of materials we need, and I even put the entrance in the wrong place, but I'll fix that in a second. Oh, and I forgot to bring this up before, but the reason why I'm using the small battery for my life support instead of the large one that it starts with is I think it's just far more convenient to switch them out. You could use the small ones for base power, but the power would burn out so quickly that you would have to constantly charge, replace it, and charge, replace. It would just be too tedious, whereas for your life support system, it'll run out much faster, don't get me wrong, but life support uses such minimal power, especially if you find ways to not have your light on all the time, that I think it's better to just switch it out like that. Also, there are many small batteries that you can take out of your equipment. The primary ones I tend to choose being the tablet and the angle grinder, because it's not that you won't use them at all, but they tend to be the least useful for this early in the game. Plus, if you really need to utilize them, you can just swap the batteries back into them. But I usually take those out and then swap between those batteries. I usually only need 2 now that I can do this part of the run much more quickly, but if you really need 3, you can use either the angle grinder or tablet. And here we go, I finally used that little 1x1 room. I didn't quite do what I said and waited until my health was down to 10 to 15%, but well, here it is. I decided to use it, and it works pretty well. You'll notice that a downside of the high pressure too is that it takes a very long time, relatively, for the air to be vacuumed out. I mean, you can see how slowly it's decreasing there in the bottom right. But once I get it down low enough, I take off my helmet, and there we go. That annoying bar is gone. I actually kind of forget here, because I don't bring the slot up, that I can actually open the jumpsuit inventory. There's actually free food and water there. I just completely forget about it and take the ones that are directly in the chest, but whatever, it works. And I just wanted to show you that little room in action. Now that that's done, I'm actually just going to skip this entire part until the majority of the base is built. You're not really missing much. It's just a lot of mining and then putting things in the arc furnace, taking them out. It's just a lot of time. I'm just going to skip until it's mostly done. And I'm back. And here I'm printing out the doors. I'm going to need 2 doors because I'm going to want to create a semi-airlock with the front of my base. It's going to be mostly manual in terms of how it works until I can get logic or IC programming going, but for now this is more than good enough. Gonna need 2, and I like to use the manual hatches. Honestly, I almost feel like there needs to be a bit of a reason to use the other doors instead of the manual hatch, other than like the pressure difference or being able to see through it. It's not that I don't think those are good enough reasons to switch to them, I just feel like the manual hatch is so efficient at its job that it's kind of hard to really justify the extra resources to switch to the other doors. But, I mean, regardless, I just also like the way they open up. I like that little valve turning. It's kind of cool. And yeah, I'm going to unofficially designate that corner as where I throw my crap. The canisters are just going to be building up there until I build that rebreather, which is going to take some time. I mean, I not only need a place to store the tank, which is the first part of it I will build pretty easily, but the temperature part, I need to cool down the air in order to successfully breathe it in. And yeah, great if you noticed it, but I didn't notice that the waist bar was going up way too high, and I actually let it max out right here. This is what happens if you do that while there's still air around you, because there still is a bit. It hasn't sucked all of it out yet. I kind of freak out a little bit, but I still manage to print a new canister and just barely save myself. Not thanks to the new canister, I do end up dying from, well, breathing in the air, technically. So after I get this done, you know, there goes the icon, and then yeah, slowly starting to fall unconscious. You can see the unconsciousness symbol on the top right, and I take the pill and I'm good. And now that is our only chance to save ourselves from that situation. So, great. Well, not our only chance. We technically can get more pills once we get trading up, but again, it's completely RNG based. And the pill itself is actually relatively pretty expensive for an early trade, so for all intents and purposes, that was our one pill for this early game part. Also, yeah, looking at the canisters, while they've just been lying on the ground right there, they've slowly been accumulating heat from the outside temperature. I haven't really looked into it, but I don't think it's possible for the canisters to heat up so much from the outside environment that they explode, which is a really good thing if that's true, because I've seen canister explosions in this game, and they're more akin to miniature nukes going off than they are to just a normal canister explosion. They do a ton of damage. I mean, maybe I'll set one off unintentionally or intentionally later, but they're very dangerous, so we do not want that to ever happen. Alright, and now we have everything we need to start on the airlock. I go in to start placing the active vent. I like to place it there for modularity's sake. If I ever want to upgrade to the large vent, or even the medium one, I can easily just take that down, and all I need to do is disable the cables under it in order to get it to fit. So I usually just like to place it right there. And yeah, to activate it, I have to manually flip that switch. Technically, I could also use like IC programming or logic to make it automatic, but we're not there yet, as I said before. And then the next step is I just need to put the passive vent outside. I guess it's technically possible to just combine the pipe networks of that one and the other one together, and you would only need one passive vent, but I'm lazy and I really don't want to throw out that much of it. So I'm just going to do it like this. Just going to throw in a bit more coal for luck. We're running a little bit low, and I think we're finally at the point where the base is near a vacuum. Sometimes there's like a little bit of lingering air that actually takes a very long time to fully filter out, but it's low enough to the point that if you look at my canisters, you'll notice that they are increasing and decreasing way slower than they were before in the outside environment. That's what we were looking for, and yeah, we're going to want to be in our base as much as possible, to the point where I'm going to try to automate as much as I can the things that we're going to use outside to be able to use them inside, because that's going to save us a lot of air down the line as well. Yeah, you may have also noticed another cool thing about this game. When all of the air has been sucked out of a room, there's no longer any sound that you can hear coming from outside and inside that you emit. It's just certain sound effects, but that's about it. I really like this, but that does mean that this room is eerily quiet. I mean, combining with the fact that it's more efficient to not have lights because they use quite a bit of power, it makes our little house here more of a tomb than an actual house. So I'm going to probably add something in there, but here I'm actually going to leave it to finish up the house officially with the airlock and add the passive vent. And there we go. Completely done now. We have an official Stationeers house, early game house. I usually like to save that part for the very end as the christener, the thing to say that it's done. And yeah, in real time, this is how long it takes. It's much faster because it's a smaller room, but still it takes a while. Eventually we're going to want to upgrade that vent to the large one, but it's pretty good for now. And an even cooler thing about that is we can use both of these vents in tandem together if we want to evacuate the air from in here faster. Eventually we're going to start moving some more temperature critical items into our base, so we really do not want the inside to ever fill up with outside gas if we can help it. Venus is more relatively safe compared to a lot of other planets because, unlike others on here, it's mostly just carbon dioxide, which is pretty inert. It's not really going to create major problems, but we still don't want it to get in here because the air technically is poisonous. It's going to be quite a while before we ever open our helmet, like try to create a breathable environment, but we still don't want it to happen. It's not just because of that, but also because of the high temperature. It can potentially cause canisters to explode, so we really don't want that coming in here. And I think that's going to be enough for this part. We already accomplished all of the goals that I set out for the early game for this part. Next up, we're going to be working on the rebreather for the next. But for now, I think that's going to be it. Sorry if the editing wasn't quite there yet. I tried to fast forward and skip the parts that I thought went on a little too long, but towards the end of this, I'm starting to think maybe I should have actually fully skipped some parts instead of just fast forwarding. But hey, live and learn. For next time, I'll try and improve it a little bit more. Anyway, see you later. Bye-bye.